We want to welcome those attending our webinar on emerging HR trends for 2022. My name is Matt Wride. I'm the president of DecisionWise. I'm joined by my partner, Christian Nielson. He is our chief strategy officer. And today we're going to be talking about things that we see as trends for 2022. Christian, welcome.
Thanks, Matt.
As everyone who starts a webinar is obligated to do, we have to acknowledge COVID. And one of the things that I love about my experience with COVID is the realization of how resilient we are. Read a great article the other day in The Atlantic that said, thank goodness, it was to the effect of thank goodness the internet didn't break when we needed it most. Right? We had a lot of systems that didn't work great. There were overwhelmed hospitals, things like that. But the one system that really allowed us to do this was the internet. And it was an in-depth article exploring how these carriers, these telecom companies, were able to make it possible for us to work from home and keep this economy going. And I just want to do a shout out to everyone for making it work and figuring out how to work in a different way. I don't know, what were some of your takeaways from COVID and kind of how we've adapted?
Well, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking through when, as I remember projects and the work we were dealing with clients in 2019, you're starting to hear a few headlines that there was this virus abroad and things like that, but having no sense of how much the world was going to change and how quickly it was going to change. And I agree that the tech really was the success, that we were able to see people do things that, if we weren't feeling this global pandemic at our heels, I think we would have had, 2-year project timelines to say, okay, we're going to, increase flexibility and get people remote workstations and things. But that wasn't the reality. We had to see people do what they would have done in years in a matter of weeks. And the tech really facilitated that. It was really interesting to see organizations mobilized to do some of these incredible things. Also, Teams is what we're using at DecisionWise, and it feels like an old friend. But not long ago, it was just kind of something we used every once in a while. And so the world certainly has changed. I also think through coaching and some of the work we do that it was rare that if we were doing a remote coaching session, we would have cameras on. And now I can't imagine, not having those cameras on and not having that face-to-face connection. So very interesting to see how the world evolved so quickly.
And I think we're going to still see the impact of this work from anywhere and tech changes that's going to filter through a little bit of what we're going to talk about today, which is, are we headed towards a second digital transformation for HR? Let me tee up sort of what we want to talk about, our 3 buckets. We want to visit the HR technology trends, really talk about how has the digital transformation gone so far for HR, and as I previewed, are we on the cusp of a second digital transformation? We'll also give some thoughts about what's happening in experience, people, data, and analytics. So that's our core of what we do here, and we want to talk a little bit about what we do and our domain, where it's going. And then third, we thought we'd just give a few highlights of general HR trends that we see on the forefront. We went to HR Tech this year. We were able to make it work, got our vaccines headed down. And so some of that is informed from just being there at the world's largest technology showcase just about a month ago. So anyway, let's jump into HR Tech trends and kind of talk about what we see happening. I'm going to buzz through just a whole litany of technology platforms that HR now uses in small businesses and in large businesses on a regular basis. Everything from applicant tracking systems as you hire and post job postings to remote interviewing, employee listening, obviously with what we do, coaching and development. We saw a big uptick in that at HR Tech, a lot of coaching. But this list is long. I wanted to just pause on this slide here. This is a source from Select Hub who does a nice job. I think in HR Tech, we can get confused by some of the acronyms. And so if you think about an HIRS, a Human Resource Information System, it does much of what's in the yellow. And then an HCM, which is a bigger version of an HIRS, it's sort of larger cousin, it does everything in the blue. And then we have these very complex systems, enterprise level systems known as HRMSs, or Human Resource Management Systems. And they do everything that's in the yellow, the blue, and then the red. These are complex systems. And I think for a long time in technology, we sort of thought that this was the digital transformation that everybody forecasted, that we were going to have these very impressive enterprise level systems and they would handle everything. I'm not so sure that we've realized that. They do a lot of things, but I think there's still a lot of specialty platforms, specialty tools out there. As you were at HR Tech with me, what were you seeing sort of as to some of the specialty tools?
Yeah, this slide's interesting just to think through. A lot of HR, the digital transformation has been, how do we take what we're doing right now and do it with computers and digitize it and just automate where we can. And I think that the things that caught my attention at HR Tech are, how do we go further? How do we rethink what's possible, not just kind of pave the paths that we've been walking, but how do we push what's possible or what we thought was possible? And so there's always a strong presence in talent acquisition. I think I paid more attention to it at HR Tech because of the Great Resignation. People are really looking at, getting talent in the door in ways they haven't before. And so those things caught my attention, digital assistants and things that I think we're looking at automating even very small tasks that hadn't been part of the conversation in the past. But it's an interesting evolution to watch unfold there as well, that the tech continues to go beyond what we've been doing yesterday to where are we going tomorrow?
Yeah, just a splash onto the screen, one of those logo walls, if you will, just showing all the various tools that are available for, as you said, specialty tasks. And we noticed, as you said, an uptick in talent acquisition, finding people now in a work from anywhere world, finding the right talent, being able to connect with them, attract, retain, engage them. We saw a lot of companies, and those legacy systems, those HRISs and human capital management systems, they don't have all the bells and whistles you need to sort of go find people in the nooks and crannies. Yeah. And so you have to turn to specialty tools. So we're going to cover what we think are the big trends we're going to see. These are our own observations. So this is really our list of 6 changes we expect to see in HR Tech. The first one is performance management. As the workforce is distributed, we are seeing the need to understand what our employees are doing, not just manage our employees with compliance or benefits portals or those types of things, but what is the work they're doing and how does that work contribute to success? So this is an interesting area, and we're going to talk about this in a sec, but this is the transition from HR Tech to work tech. And HR is in this intersection of that happening, but performance management, I think, is going to be a hot area. What are your observations when it comes to performance management?
Performance management is always been something I'm very fascinated with because I don't think there's one right answer. And we see this ongoing conversation of, we're going to do less, we're going to do more in this space. And I'm excited to see how technology can enhance this. We, of course, have our own place in this area where we're leveraging multi-rater feedback. I think that's going to have an important role to play as we see distributed workforce. And how do we really understand the experience that's being created? How do we really measure and provide feedback on performance when we're not co-located and thinking through how those conversations change?
You and I have been in hours and hours of working groups trying to figure out performance because it's not like the person's in the office next to the boss and can be rated a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're working on developing in our technology multiple perspectives, multi-rater, so we can then stitch that together and give a holistic view based on all of these disparate intersections. But yeah.
And it's also the thing nobody loves. I've yet to meet the person that says, I love performance management and how it feels to be rated next to my peers and to go through these big, you and I both came from professional services firms and the process there took months where people were writing up reports and things and the work suffers because we have to stop and do these big laborious assessment performance management processes. And so I think this is an area that is ripe for disruption, and we're going to see a lot of very cool things happening here.
Sure. Okay, the next one is the use of nudges. We think nudges are going to get folded into a variety of systems. There may not be just a single platform that accomplishes nudges, but I think we're getting intelligent about how we use technology to remind people. I like this nudge continuum, which is the feather of statistical insignificance to the baseball bat of paternalistic overreach. But we're trying to find the balance, and we will see nudges. We call them prompts here at DecisionWise. We're building some of that technology into our platform, but we see nudges as being a part of work tech and HR tech.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of opportunity, and it is exactly in that continuum, which is how do you get the balance right for a role, for an organization, for a culture, and also for an individual. I might like more of that, than more prompting than you might, and so the organizations that get that right, or the tech that gets that right, are the ones that are going to win.
Yeah, I foresee a day when managers are getting reminders to recognize employees, or getting nudges, and like you said, they'll be able to balance it to what their needs are and set their level of nudgeness, if you will. All right, let's jump to the next one. This is here to stay, folks. Diversity, equity, inclusion is not just a topic we talk about. It's not just a training topic or a mission statement or a value. It is going to be folded into technology.
This is something I see. Interesting conversations that have really come to the forefront around employee listening and the work we do have been around COVID and all the things around that. So return to work, hybrid workplace, working policies and things like that. The other one is diversity, equity, inclusion. It's always been part of the conversation, but it jumped to the front of the line in the last 18 months. Black Lives Matter and some of the other conversations that have opened up nationally and globally have really pushed this. And so I see that not only the tech that helps facilitate understanding and improving this area, but also the organizations that come out with the best or the most useful point of views there. So people are looking around. People genuinely want to improve in these areas, and they don't know how. And so I think people are looking for a maturity model, and there's some great ones out there, but a point of view, and then the technology solutions that help them measure where they're at and how they're improving.
And we're seeing that getting folded into talent management systems, where we're tracking metrics, tracking things that we never tracked before, in an effort to better bring out diverse perspectives and make sure that we have an inclusive environment.
Right.
So more on that. This isn't something I see overnight. We're not going to have a DEI platform, but it's going to get folded in little by little, and then eventually someone may actually do something, but a little ways out, but it's definitely on the horizon. So obviously work from home is a big aspect. This notion of how does technology support remote workforces where people are across time zones. What's really interesting is we're so used to synchronous communication, Christian, where I'm either on a phone with you or I'm in person, and our conversation happens simultaneously. But if I'm working with someone in London and I live in Los Angeles, I have enough of a time zone difference that not everything I do with that person is synchronous. And so how do we bridge those gaps for asynchronous options and thinking more, as HR professionals, we can't just get everybody together and train them at the same time. We have to know how to stage things. I think I was telling you that one of the largest tech raises has been for a solution to help take training and make it digital for, so that you can push it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's telling. I see a lot of organizations, every aspect of work has to be filtered through this lens of we're not in the office anymore. And so we have to rethink everything. So training is a big piece of that. We're seeing that in the number and the demand for our 360 and coaching offerings, because it's a way to grow and develop people, and they don't have to be co-located for this experience. That's a piece that we're seeing and feeling here. It's also so there's the how do we get work done and do all the things we need to do to support and grow, but there's also the technology, I think, that's going to be very important for establishing that sense of place and connection and culture and things that help build that. And so I think we'll continue to see those platforms we've all come to rely on expand and do more tricks in those spaces. So Teams and whatever else your organization may be.
My daughter works for a Silicon Valley tech company. They use affinity groups. She joined the Latina group because her sister-in-law is from Guatemala, and these companies are reaching out and creating connections. Both there's an example of making it DEI focused, but then she's part of these affinity groups, and we're finding ways to build cultures even though it's a virtual place, not necessarily a physical place.
Right.
Learning. This is top of mind. We are trying to help talent and learning and development professionals know what to teach their people, how to give them the resources they need to learn. But we're going away from a classroom setting, sage on a stage, as they call it. We're leaving those days behind, and learning is a la carte. It is student driven, learner. It is asynchronous. It's start stop. It's consumed in bite-sized segments as opposed to long 2-hour trainings. And we're seeing those things get folded into LMSs. But even then, we're seeing, for example, in our work, we're integrating with learning management systems so that as we see how people are performing from competency perspective, because we measure competencies here, we're feeding that information back to L&D professionals who are able then to tweak the LMS to provide content for areas that we're weak. And that's an example of where we're changing the way we do our technology to accommodate this new way of learning.
Yeah, and how do we help support learning across different industries and different? So we talk a lot about, and I think there's a big conversation about these remote workers. There's still a large population that is in the office or in hospitals and that are in hospitals, or these deskless workers is a term that we've learned to love, that still we need to accommodate. And I think that's your last category. It was an unintentional segue, but into deskless workers, those that are on the job, not necessarily anchored to their email all day, maybe working from a smartphone, maybe having periodic checks in on a kiosk or some of those things. But how do we continue to support and meet their needs? And how does technology evolve to give people the freedom and flexibility to not be tied to a desk, but to get their work done in ways that are effective and also meaningful for them?
Yeah, we face that challenge all the time with deskless workers. How do we understand their feelings, their perceptions, attitudes, beliefs? How do we survey them when they're not connected to a computer? They may not even have a company email address.
Right.
They may just have a phone number. So technology is growing in this area as they accommodate the deskless workforce and as we make sure that they're part of this new transformation in work.
And just along those lines, it's interesting. Technology is evolving for the deskless worker, but also employee expectations and an openness to new ideas is evolving. For example, years ago, we've always, or for a long time, we've had the capability to survey via smartphone and use QR codes or texting and things like that. But the employees were historically very sensitive to that. Like, that's my phone, or Big Brother's watching. And there's a new openness or an expectation that, it's okay, it's a phone. It's how we communicate, and I'm okay using my personal phone to provide feedback and some. So it's an interesting evolution of attitude along with the technology.
It's a good observation. So I previewed this, that I think we're on the cusp of a second digital transformation for HR. So we went from these complex systems, compliance or fixes, where we took all of these processes and put them into human capital management systems. And now we have this second digital transformation, which is from HR tech to work tech. And just going to throw up here, what are the differences between HR tech and work tech? Well, the slide we showed you before is kind of emblematic of HR tech. It was solving HR's needs. Now work tech is solving the workers' needs. Everything from well-being to chat to just learning opportunities, pay, self-service portals. Like, we're thinking beyond just organizing data and systematizing processes through technology, to where now the technology is supporting and helping us build a culture and a work environment that works for our people. So I do think there's a second digital transformation. I think that's what this next decade is, and I will call it work tech as opposed to HR tech. What's your thoughts? I
like the way you mentioned it, shifting from meeting HR needs, which are real and legitimate, and I think we're the first transformation needed to occur, but now to the employee and how do we help facilitate work getting done and also creating a better experience for employees.
Well, you see on the bottom there, Work Tech House, we never would have worried about someone's home. But now the home is actually part of our work experience.
Right.
And we have to consider, do we provide technology? Do we provide a green screen for someone? How do we support the house and what it's like to be in a house and yet still work? It's like things we just never imagined.
Yeah, it wasn't long ago you would never imagine that you would be considering buying furniture for your employee's home, but for them to actually accomplish that work. But that's a reality we live in. And how do you get it there? How do you, account for it? All these things are.
How do you show up? We've talked about this. We're teasing about starting a new business, which is just go around and get the equipment from employees that have left. Show up in a van and like, I need to get your computer, I need to get your camera, I need to get your ring light.
Yeah, and recognizing that that's part of the experience you're creating for them, and they'll tell their friends about how they their exit was from a remote. Was it unceremonious, or was there some thought put into it?
So what does this all mean for the HR practitioner? It means you should be scared. I want to say that that's a joke, but it's not. Cybersecurity, the ability to protect data, the ability to protect, to secure information, to keep it private, to know when it's appropriate to use information. Our HR leaders need to get better at it. So not only are we expecting them to become data analysts and understand how to consume information, organize it, and get insights from that information, we all now need to protect it, secure it, and make sure that people's data is private and that we're appropriately using this vast ocean of information. Okay, let's go into our second topic area, which is experience, people, data, and analytic trends.
It looks like we do have a question. Yeah. Can you explain the nudge continuum a little bit more, please? And thank you.
Well, the nudge continuum is just for us. Christian and I build technology, and for us, it's what do we put? We think of the continuum as how do we decide what features go into our technology. So how often, we face this all the time, Christian, how often do we send out a reminder telling someone, you forgot to take your survey, you forgot to take your survey, you forgot to take your survey?
The technology can identify patterns and messages and actions that should be taken. And so it's how in your face are we with that? Are we sending you, are we texting you when you're behind on a task? Or, a simple way to think about this is when we run our, let's say, a 360 survey, we send out reminders to people that haven't taken that. Well, how do those reminders evolve as we get closer to that deadline? What happens after the deadline? Do we send them 6 emails a day? Some people might love that. Most people would not. And so getting that balance right, and not only just like, I think that's about the simplest nudge you could have, but also how tailored are those prompts to the individual? Does it come in and say, hey, Matt, it's time to do Christian's performance review. How do you think he's doing in this area? Is that a text message? And so how much we're communicating, how we're communicating, what those messages are trying to, what action they're trying to drive with the individual. So there's this continuum. Are we doing too much, too little? Right,
and then it becomes complex for us as we build in the logic into our technology. How much do we allow the user to define that nudge continuum from leave me alone to hound me constantly, and should that, and how much do we want to, because every time we introduce that, these are great features, they're appreciated, but they create a challenge in supporting a stable technology platform.
Yeah, there's some things I don't want to hear about, and I'll check once a month and I'm disciplined enough, and I don't want a technology solution to tell me. There's other things I wish I had more nudging. For example, I forgot to take the garbage out this week. I wish I would have had a nudge in place reminding me to do something like that.
And so the nudge continuum is just that, is just recognizing that we can use technology to nudge, and that we have to balance, build that framework into our technology platforms, but give people the flexibility to manage that so it's not overwhelming to people. All right, we're going to keep going then. Thanks for the question. Experience, people, data, and analytics trends. So we're going to jump in here and just some of the changes we're seeing. What I'm going to do is just list them all out, and then we're going to just dive into a few of these more in depth. First, I call it DIY pulses are out and design pulsing programs are in. We want to pull our hair out around here because no one uses pulsing definitions the same. But when I call it DIY pulse, what we're referring to is a lot of platforms that are in the survey business say, hey, it's really easy to spool up a survey, send it out, ask a few questions, and as survey folks and as experts, we get really freaked out about that because we know that you have survey fatigue, that you have to have questions that are validated, that it needs to be part of a program. And so what we're saying is it's a good idea to regularly check in, to have interval to check in during intervals, but to do so through design pulses as opposed to just sort of, hey, today's Monday, why don't you ask a question? Like that world is out and programs are in.
I spent some time in organizational effectiveness within healthcare, and one thing I take with that is just the concept of do no harm. So if we're going to run a survey, we want to make sure we're not making anything worse. And sometimes just kind of those haphazard pulsing strategies or no strategy around a pulse can do some damage.
Life cycle surveys, a life cycle survey is a type of design pulse. It's a subset. A life cycle might be something we send out when someone's onboarded, maybe 6 months into the process. I mean, really, as we bring people on in a virtual world, we need these frequent check-ins, but they're designed, they have a structure to them. We have our own methodology even, but we have found them to be a really rich source of people data. We knew that they were going to be good, but I think they've been better than we thought. And so just use life cycles and sprinkle them in as a way to complement other types of listening. Listening programs that go beyond annual employee engagement surveys. So in our space, we call them anchor surveys now because they're not necessarily annual, but you have this very well thought out, well structured survey. And then around that, you have these other listening devices that give us color and context. And from that, we get a greater perspective. What are you seeing here, Christian, about how we use the anchor surveys and how are we changing?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey with the anchor survey as well, because not long ago people said, we want more frequent, smaller pulsing. And we'd see things like 2% participation on those types of pulses. So I haven't seen a replacement that does the same thing that the anchor or the annual survey does. But those become much more powerful if they're augmented by life cycle surveys, onboarding, exit data, some of those key moment, around a promotion, some of those things. We do like anniversary surveys where we're pulsing someone's anniversary date and we're providing them some recognition. Congrats on another year with our team. We'd love to hear some feedback. Adding all of those together to a more complete listening strategy really opens up some possibilities to understand and shape the employee experience.
And here in a moment, we'll lay out an example of a typical program so you can kind of get a sense what we're talking about. Measurement and analytics experts are starting to separate from all-in-one tools. Workday bought Peakon, which was a survey engagement tool, and we're seeing that you can, and UltiPro forever has had, or UKG has had, the ability to run a survey within their platform, but they're still limited. They can't trend, they can't benchmark, they can't do time series reporting, and they certainly can't do some of the powerful analytics that we do. And so what's happening is those of us who kind of want to focus really on this science of measurement, we're starting to separate ourselves from these all-in-one and say, look, those are great. They may work for a lot of organizations, but there are other organizations out there that want specific help in this area. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach. Getting water to the end of the row remains the number one challenge. The metaphor here is agriculture, where you use furrows in order to send water from the start of the crop all the way to the end. And if you don't have those positioned right, dug right, and even they can't be level, they have to be sloped so that the water flows naturally. If you don't have that all right, you don't get the water to the end of the row. And we use that as a metaphor of how do we take the insights that we gather and get them into the hands of someone who can do something about it. And so that continues to be a number one challenge there. All right, let's jump in and show you an example of sort of how we think about a listening program and how we use anchor surveys and then filter things in. So continuing listening, so here we have this continuum. So we'll start with an annual survey, and it's going to bookend our program.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's still not a really great replacement for an annual survey. And why is that? Well, one, with an annual survey, you can go deeper. You can ask more questions. They're typically longer than some of the pulses we'll talk about here in a moment. And you can get more detail. It's also a nice event for driving change. So you almost get a starting line as well as a finishing line in terms of trending and tracking what you're doing, and also kind of the kickoff for some action planning with managers. So it serves a very important function in a listening strategy.
And then we'll put a pulse survey, maybe more, but at least a designed pulse in the middle of that.
Yeah, very deliberate, often a subset of the larger survey, maybe if there's some specific strategic actions the organization's taken, adding a few more detailed items in those areas. But it's not something that we decide, hey, tomorrow let's do a pulse. It's very deliberate and planned out.
Then what I call survey snippets, this is those, you fill it in, maybe you do draft up a quick survey as needed, but we're not relying on those. They can be something to enhance the process. And then we get to onboarding exit surveys. Talk to us a little bit about our approach here.
Yeah, so our approach on this is, well, one, we love them just because they're these major milestones in the employee experience, how they've joined the organization. Are we enabling them to be successful, giving them the understanding and the tools to do their job, but also are we priming them for engagement in their first 90 days? And do they know how to do their job, and do they want to do their job here? That's essentially what our methodology is trying to understand there. And exit surveys are so critical because it's a natural time for reflection, and all of their insights are about to walk out the door. And so we want to make sure we've got an efficient program to get that feedback in a timely way back to the decision makers and to improve that employee experience.
You mentioned anniversary surveys as a nice way of thanking people, recognizing them for their service. And it's sort of a natural time period when you might reflect back on what's it like for me over this last year? Am I glad I joined? It's just, we found it to be a really good moment when people are receptive to sharing their feelings with us.
And it's, we've got that EX monitoring term up there, employee experience monitoring. Depending on the size of your company, it's kind of a stratified random sample that's always going. And it doesn't fill in your face. It's a natural time, as you mentioned, to provide feedback. And the benefit for the organization is, we've always got these surveys going, and so we can see what people are saying, what's on their mind, and it's less intrusive than just burying them in pulse surveys.
And then we are big fans, obviously, of multi-rater feedback. We believe that multi-rater feedback, in a variety of ways, whether it's evaluative, used for performance, whether it's to help us understand where people can grow and get better, we view that as also a part of what we call standard org surveys, because we're a big believer that multiple perspectives help us synthesize the information better.
And one thing I found here is a lot of organizations have a legacy view that these are for underperformers or something only, and they don't say, okay, we can use 360 feedback as a follow-up to an engagement survey. We can use this, let's run our bottom 5 teams through some 360 feedback and coaching, give them some additional support. Or let's invest in our high potentials with this. Or let's kick off, a leadership development program with some self-awareness so that they're kind of primed and open before we teach them some of these other skills. And so it's got some really wonderful applications.
Yeah, one of the most effective trainings or development sessions I've ever attended started just with that, with a 360. And then they tear off the Band-Aids, they expose your areas, and then they work with you to build you up on this crescendo. But they sort of had to tear off all of the baggage that I had brought to this development, and they did that by the 360.
In another life, I like to joke, but there was a real observation. In another life, I did a lot of training with Crucial Conversations. I teach that class, which, by the way, is phenomenal content, all these things. But I never had a class where I didn't see people the first day say, oh, you know who needs this? My boss or my husband or my wife or, my coworker needs this. But that wasn't why they were in there. They were in there because they needed it. And a 360 kind of gives you that moment of looking in the mirror before a training. So some great applications. We do include it as a nice addition to a listening strategy.
So how is this a trend? It's a trend away from just running your survey to actually running EX listening programs that are constantly sort of running and in the background helping us sort of monitor on a consistent basis rather than just these touch points.
Before we move from this screen, it looks like we have a question about the length. What are the average length of these surveys as in expected time to complete, the number of questions, and avoiding survey fatigue. Survey fatigue is real, and we're very aware of that, and we want to make sure we're not overwhelming people. And that's why we've actually laid this out. These do not happen all at once. Our longest survey typically would be that annual survey, an anchor survey, and it's around 50 questions, which sounds like a lot. We have some techniques to shorten shorten that. And we actually do a lot of research around the time it takes. It's about 10 to 15 minutes, and it's once a year. So it's not a huge impact on the employee population. The other surveys would be shorter. Sometimes 360s get a little bit longer, but again, those are strategically used. If we're running larger groups through 360s, we would recommend shorter instruments so that we're not hitting that survey fatigue. But the longest survey would be that annual 10 to 15, typically tops. And then the others would be much, much shorter. 20 questions is a kind of best practice for an exit survey because on their way out, they're less likely to complete.
Yeah, we don't go over that. And anniversary surveys might be as simple as, tell us about your experience, and we're using natural language processing and some machine learning on the back end to sort of, ferret out the data that way rather than sort of a traditional agreement scale survey.
Yeah, I think that's where the tech continues to evolve, is how do we not overwhelm people with these surveys.
So I just want to cover some of the tools that we have in our toolkit. So this slide here that you'll see, we use all of these at various times. This is sort of a map of the things that we do here at DecisionWise. I just throw this in, and we included it as a slide just so that you can see that you're not limited just to running an annual survey, that you can build a campaign or a program, and you can have focus groups, and you can maybe service effectiveness. You see that one there under continuous listening. That's where you survey and say, hey, we want to know as HR, how well are we serving your needs? So there's just a variety of ways to sort of get out there and get the data so that you can make data-driven decisions.
One area that's up there that I think is going to be, we've done it a number of times in the past. It's not something we do very frequently, but I think it'll be an interesting thing to look at and consider as organizations operate remotely for a more extended period of time, would be org network analysis, which is who's influenced opinion throughout the organization. So it's almost understanding, I always say, you can give us your organizational structure, we can run some surveys and do some work and tell you your organic structure, where influence really lies in some of these nodes and things.
Well, we're going to be able to overlay what people think. So in an org network analysis, we might ask them, well, tell us who you go to, and we'll compare that to actual traffic in Teams, and we can say, is that real? So those are exciting frontiers for us. Okay, we want to get into our last general bucket, other general HR trends. And let me just sort of, list these out for us. So self-service options are increasing, this, but with being virtual, with our workforces being more remote, we need to have the ability to service their needs, whether that's, updating their dependents and all of those types of things. Self-service options are just increasing, and you'll see that in technology. And so a good HR leader, a good HR business partner needs to be thinking of ways to take what they do on a day-to-day basis and consider how they can make it self-service.
Yeah, it's like the grocery store. Self-check is
right.
Emerging in more and more areas.
Traditional compliance-oriented HR skills and tasks are being taken over by technology. Embrace that. This is the chance to be strategic. HR has always said, hey, let's be more strategic. Great. Let's offload onto technology, the compliance, the risk management side of things, and let's get down to the business of growing and developing people. Coaching and mental health services. BetterUp is a well-known tech startup in the work tech space. It's designed to provide mental health services, designed to build coaching networks within organizations. And it's kind of a cool startup to follow. This is new. We're going to see a lot more of this type of thing. We here at DecisionWise, for example, in our 360 work, we are focused on certifying internal coaches and having those internal coaches do 360 debriefs. So we love to do a 360 and then have that accompanied with a person-to-person debrief of the report so that there's this context, somebody to talk through things with. And so we try to train up a group of people capable of doing that specifically for what we do. And so we're buying into kind of what BetterUp has done, and we're doing our own version. In fact, we have a new credential, a certified 360 coach, that you can, attain a digital badge, and it's an actual credential we have that you can learn how to become a certified 360 coach. And that's all in this effort it's just part of this change in how we approach HR. Okay, upskilling and learning. People are looking for ways to, in this digital world, learn, gain new skills, grow their career. So again, it just continues to be a focus.
Yeah, and we've talked so much about what has changed. What has not changed is that people still expect to grow and develop as part of your organization. So understanding and finding new ways to support and enhance your employee growth proposition is what we're describing it as. What we're offering for employees to grow and develop and explore their potential.
Yeah. You've brought to DecisionWise and helped us create a model. We call them the 3 Ps. Why don't you talk about that? Because I think it's a great framework to think about how do you use technology to build on those 3 Ps. Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of an evolution of some of my thinking on this, and some of our research here. But as a manager or as an organization, we've got to make sure we're being brilliant in the basics. We're meeting the needs to help create safety and enablement and all those things. But we also have to do things that invite them to engage and commit to the work. And we use a model called purpose, path, and place for that. So we have to give people a purpose. The work needs to have a meaning besides the job and the KPIs themselves. There has to be a sense of purpose behind the work. There has to be a path, and that's kind of where this upskilling and learning piece comes from. I need to know how I can grow and explore my potential as an employee of this organization, grow and improve and progress. And then place would be that sense of belonging, connection, community. And are we creating that so they really feel like they are belonging, and that would be inclusive of diversity and that part of the conversation as well. But are we creating a place for every one of our employees? So purpose, path, and place, this idea of a path, and continue to create a path even when our employees are remote is important.
I'm glad you shared that with us, because this framework is how you can evaluate where you can use technology, where you need to just have good old-fashioned training, whatever the case may be. Help as an HR practitioner and professional, sit down and say, do an audit, a self-audit. How are we doing as an organization in helping people find their purpose, in helping them find their path, and helping them find their place, and teaching managers how to deliver that type of experience. If you want a winning employee experience, an experience that results in employee engagement, it's a manager that can help bring those 3 Ps to a reality. Asynchronous working and learning, we talked about this. We're going to have to get better at messaging things that don't have to be done in real time. I don't think we figured it out completely, but one example is we're going to find a way to leave a message, like a video message, and that's going to be able to sit and it might be longer than we're used to. We're used to voicemails of the past that were, hey, call me when you get a chance. Maybe we're going to have to learn how to leave a Teams video for 5 minutes. It's very instructive. It's on camera, because you just need to leave it with them, because it's not possible to find time to connect. We're going to get meeting fatigue here really shortly as we all try to sync up virtually. I think we're going to start seeing asynchronous working and learning and how we communicate in an asynchronous manner. So does it feel all overwhelming? Can technology, feel overwhelming? Is the first digital transformation overwhelming, and now we're saying there's a second digital transformation? It can, but we're going to leave you with this image of a successful, happy employee. And basically the metaphor is it's doable. And I go back to, at the end of the day, COVID hit us, and yet we made it. We survived. And what a testament to this human spirit and just to our ability to use and make things work. And so I'm much more optimistic, and I think this picture reflects kind of where I'm at and sort of where I think HR is going. I'm excited for this next transformation that we're entering. So I don't know what your final thoughts are, Christian.
Yeah, my final thoughts, when we do those coaching sessions for leaders, typically around 360, I often leave them with a question, which is, what experience are you creating? And is it the right one? And I think that's something that we as HR leaders and those trying to shape an employee experience could be asking us about the broader experience, and to kind of use as a nice calibration point throughout as the world around us continues to change and evolve. Just coming back to what experience experience are we creating for our employees, and is it the right one? And if not, how can we leverage technology or change our approach to create the right experience that's going to invite engagement, it's going to lead to those business outcomes that we're committed to. So it's exciting times we live in.
Yeah. Well, thank you to our audience. Again, if you want more information about us as a firm, you can find us at DecisionWise.com. And we look forward to visiting with you again on another one of our monthly webinars. So hope you have a great day.